In 2024, is Springfield Armory still the gun to jump into the 1911 world with? Where does the Garrison fit into Springfield Armory's new lineup? All that and more. Welcome back to the Humble Marksman channel. I'm David, and this is the Springfield Armory Garrison Commander in 45 AARP or ACP, depending on your level of edginess. And first, in 2024, guys, being a dad is the most important job any of us can do, and I want to encourage you to dad harder than you've ever dadded this year. And to that point, why did the lobster blush? It saw the ocean's bottom. For a long time, myself and probably others knew the Springfield Armory lineup, and they've since kind of rebranded some of the guns, changed some of the features on them. So where this gun sort of fits into the lineup is the least expensive is still the mil spec. That's going to get you an arched mainspring housing. It's going to have the single-sided safety. It's got little tiny sights that are more similar, I should say, to the original issue 1911s that were issued, during the war back in the day. And it has the full spur hammer without skeleton eyes. Where it goes from there is it steps up and it kind of diverges into two directions, depending on whether you want to go with like kind of updated classical features, which would be the Garrison lineup, or into the more modern contemporary features, which would end up being the Ronin lineup. The Garrison MSRP starts at $868, but it can be had right now looking on the internet for less than $800 if you look hard. And what the Garrison is going to get you at that price point is sort of a unadorned slab-sided gun. I mean, it has an absolutely gorgeous, just classic 1911 lines. Slide serrations only at the back, but it updates the sights to something more usable with like a Novak rear sight and 3-dot white sights. There is only one safety on one side of the pistol, but it is kind of an enlarged, nice size safety. There are two options available. There is the hot salt blue, which is what you're seeing here. And guys, this blue is absolutely gorgeous when you get it out in like natural lighting. I was just enamored with it when I was on the range filming with it, especially after you shot a lot with it and would get like a rainbow hue at the front of the gun. Super gorgeous. And they also have their stainless model as well. The Ronin, on the other hand, introduces forward slide serrations. It's got fiber optic sights, but the rest of the features are more or less identical. And then the lineup kind of steps up from there, going up to the loaded and then into the TRP and all operator, all the other ones that you're already familiar with. So if you want the classic 1911 look, the Garrison is the one of the models that Springfield offers that you should be looking at. Now, this is a good point to stop and disclose that this was sent to me to make a video review with for you guys. Doesn't mean we're not going to call balls and strikes, but now you know. But before we get going with that, I want to thank today's video sponsor, which is Aura. Have you ever put your name into a search engine and looked it up on the internet and then just been absolutely terrified by the amount of personal information available to anybody on the web? Yeah, it's kind of crazy. There are data brokers out there selling your personal information. Your passwords and such can show up on the dark web, and that's where Aura comes in. Aura is an online command center that monitors the dark web for your personal information, provides an antivirus, a VPN, and it will proactively try and remove you from the data broker websites. It is a one-stop shop to maintain your personal security on the internet. And if you go for a family plan, you can download the apps on your family members' phones and restrict access to things that your children probably shouldn't be looking at. When I signed up for Aura, I was immediately notified of 11 data leaks that my information showed up in, and it showed me where all of them were, and I could take appropriate action, changing passwords and the such. It even goes a step further and shows you which of your passwords have been compromised and are available on the dark web, which is fairly terrifying. As mentioned, it's also proactive, as well as it's got antivirus software that you can put on any of your devices. It also has VPN capability, allowing you to conceal your web traffic from things that might be tracking you. And if something does go wrong, there is an insurance policy wrapped up in the program to help you put the pieces back together if your identity is ever stolen. All of that functionality is available for a super modest $12 a month, so check out aura.com/humblemarksman and get your online security tuned up today. Thank you to Aura for sponsoring the video. So what does that $868 get you if you pick up a Garrison? First and foremost, it comes with the standard Springfield Armory zipper pouch, which is better to have than not in the cardboard box that you'll probably want to recycle. It only comes with one 7-round magazine that is the flush base pad, metal base pad type of magazine, which is a little bit disappointing. It's nicer to have two, and since this is a 1911, maybe 3 or 4 magazines because, you know, it runs out pretty quick when you're on the range with a single stack. The important parts of the gun are the bones of the gun, and that's where Springfield Armory really gets this right. The slide and frame are both forged. Price point 1911s generally have cast frames, and over a long enough time scale, cast frames can run into issues like cracking and the like. That's not a problem with the forged frame. The forged frame generally will also have better fit. Like if you pick up a Ruger 1911 in the store and just mess with the slide to frame fit, there's usually a lot of play. There is pretty much no play whatsoever in this Springfield Armory run. There's a tiny itty bitty amount of rock that I can get. You probably can't even hear it. But it's very, very tightly fit to the point that disassembling it to keep it oiled and stuff like that, I'm having to He-Man the slide off the front of the gun because it is so tightly fit. That said, the fitting is appropriate enough to where there was no break-in period with the gun. Getting it out on the range, it immediately was able to just plug and play, load up the magazines, and the gun was running right out of the box. The gun comes with a match grade barrel, meaning that the accuracy that you'll get out of the gun is fantastic. And that's ultimately what you want with a 1911 pistol, because you're picking up a gun that has, you know, very high inherent accuracy, and the Garrison definitely delivers in that regard. The laminate grips that they provide are thin and a little bit slippery. Honestly, the checkering doesn't do a ton. They almost feel more like plastic than they do proper wood, and that's just due to the sealing coat that they put on the grips. So they're not super aggressive, and they don't necessarily fill up your hand. They aren't super big. So something like LOK Grips or G10 grips of your choosing would probably be a nice upgrade for a gun like this. If you do look at LOK Grips, I've got a code HUMBLE, saves you 10%. The mainspring housing appears to be steel, and it has excellent checkering, so the gun does bite into the back of your palm when you're shooting. There's a great memory bump on the grip safety as well, so it's pretty much impossible not to depress the grip safety when you're gripping the gun. But the front strap of the pistol is smooth, which is common on this kind of price point of gun. Looking at the trigger is a good 2011 single action only trigger. Putting the trigger at the wall, very little bit of take up, which is pretty typical for the platform. A very, very firm wall, and the brake is at about 5 pounds on my Lyman digital trigger scale. So there it is. A little tiny bit of over travel, and the reset, as you're used to, is super short. The quality of the trigger is very good. It's a little bit heavy. I mean, most people like lighter, you know, 3-pound triggers or so on a gun like this, but at the same time, the quality is very good, very predictable. Talking about some other features, and these are honestly typical for a Commander style gun, but when a gun goes from a 5-inch slide down to a 4 1/4-inch slide, they generally increase the recoil spring weight by about 2 pounds, which is true on this gun. So it's like an 18-pound or so spring on there. And when you couple that with the traditional lines of the 1911 with no forward cocking serration, if you're somebody who likes to manipulate in front of the ejection port, it just makes it really difficult, because the sides of the gun, which are gorgeous and kind of like a honed sort of finish that make the gun really shiny, it's just friggin' gorgeous. It makes it really hard to grab onto. So I ended up having to pull from the rear when I was charging the gun, which is not the technique that I normally use, but at the same time, not that big a deal, just making you guys aware of it. So if you're somebody with reduced hand strength looking for an easy racking gun, perhaps the 9mm model uses less recoil spring than the 45, but the recoil spring is pretty stout. Getting the gun onto the range and shooting with it, it is a 33-ounce gun before magazine and ammo, according to the website. It was controllable with the 45 ACP. I wish I had more traction on the grips to really stay planted with the gun, but the gun is so accurate that when I was shooting, I typically shoot at about 15 yards, because that kind of shows you if a gun is going to hold it together or the accuracy falls apart, or it really kind of telegraphs if there's a bad trigger, what effect that has on the practical accuracy of the gun. It doesn't matter how accurate the gun is when you bench rest it if you can't extract that accuracy when you're shooting offhand like you would be potentially in a defensive encounter or a match setting. I was pleased to see that the gun was very accurate as just shooting at steel at 15 yards. I was able to connect more or less all day. Now, what I did notice when I put it on paper is that the accuracy is exceptional, like you would want from a match grade barrel. But the sights on my gun needs to be adjusted, because they were about 2 inches left at 15 yards. I was shooting with 230 grain ball ammunition, and the gun fed no problem. I was shooting PMC bronze, I believe is what I was shooting for the most part. And I also put some hollow points through it. I had some Hornady critical duty that I put through it, and I was pleased to see that it fed hollow points no problem. But those hollow points are very very much present like round nose projectiles, so they generally feed in most 1920-11 style guns. The build quality is very high on the gun, and it is very apparent when you go to shoot it. If you like kind of the feature set and are looking to get into something that you can kind of customize and get kind of built up to where you want it to be, trigger job and stuff like that, the bones of this gun are awesome, but out of the box, the gun is pretty great as is. If all you wanted to do was throw grips on it and go down the road, it's certainly high enough quality where you could do that and have a gun that would be absolutely fantastic and you could probably give to your children, because ultimately it is a steel frame gun that's going to outlast us all, so that's all to the good. If you've made it this far, you might consider watching this video on the Bull Armory 5-inch GI that I did a while ago.